Well, hi everyone and welcome. It's nice to see you again, CJ, and nice to see Jacqueline and Dawn and Nancy, Richard, Carolyn, everybody. Great to have you with us. I want to acknowledge that St. Mark's Cathedral gathers on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, who are still here, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of all the Coast Salish tribes. And I will turn it over to Richard now, who has been doing these conversations for going on a couple of years here. Always gives us really great information and good resources. So looking forward to another good conversation. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Marjorie. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for being here today. So we're looking at money and investing today. Marjorie says I provide information, but a lot of what's really the value on this now comes from discussion. So I hope we'll have discussions along the way and sharing of ideas and insights. What we're going to do is start out by looking more at the spending and saving and banking side of things in the first half. And then I'll go through some materials and look at that. And then we'll have some discussion around that. And then in the second half, we'll look more at the investing and philanthropy and even estate planning, and how all that comes together and some of the options on it, including impact investing, and what we can do on that. Let me just begin with a short prayer. Lord God, you are the creator of the world, and you have placed your people in unique callings in every corner of the globe. We recognize that we are only a small piece of your grand puzzle. Help us steward that opportunity well. Help us steward your creation. Help us work with you to bring order to a fallen world. We want to invest your resources to bring about your kingdom. Show us how, when, and where, and how to steward what you've put in our hands. Use us to bring about human flourishing, to redeem what is broken, to proclaim your name in our communities. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So, if we start with sort of some frameworks and some thoughts around looking at what we do with money. We obviously use money in a whole lot of ways every day. And we can have cash in our wallets, and people do different things, whether it's bank accounts or credit unions or investment accounts or financial advisors, or all different ways, and it sort of depends on how much resources we have. But a number of things that we do, it's sort of hard to get by without using money in some form these days, and more your debit or credit card and paying with your phone and tapping and all that kind of thing. So if we look at it, when we're doing purchases, when we're buying things, we'll talk a little bit about that as well, because that's part of using our money too. What we buy provides funds to companies for their products and services. And so as we think about it, we can look at what type of company are we buying things from? And what are they providing and how do they produce those things? So we'll talk about that a little bit. And whether it is factory farms or oil companies or renewable power companies or local farmers or a variety of clothing we can buy that's eco-friendly or not, a lot of different things. So our purchases make a difference. Mm-hmm. The bank we use, we often don't think about. I mean, there are 4 or 5 big banks in the US, and there's something like 80% of deposits. So most people are using those. But there are sort of a couple ways to think about it. We'll spend a little bit of time too. But whatever we put in the bank in our savings account, whether it's big or small, they're using that to, they make money off it, so they've got profits. They also use our deposits. Just the banking fundamental is you put money in, they lend it out to someone else. And depending on who it gets lent to, it can have a positive or negative impact. Because if they're lending for energy companies that are eco-friendly or not, or they're lending to mining companies or to other companies, it can have a big impact. And we'll look at actually some of what the impact is in terms of carbon emissions from the lending that banks do. We don't think about the credit card or debit card so much. But when we use our credit card or debit card, the bank gets a percentage of every transaction. And so they're using some of that for funding. They're using that to expand their activities in certain areas, which can be good or not so good. And so we will look at that a little bit in terms of how our money is used by the banks. When we invest, we can go through a brokerage firm. Many people have 401ks or 403bs. My wife is a teacher, so I think she has a 403b. I get all this mixed up. The IRAs that we have, investments that we do directly. We invest in a variety of ways. And for stocks, if we buy individual stocks, which very few people do, relatively few, or we invest in small companies directly, we can say, okay, this company is doing good, and I'll look at it a little bit. But sometimes we don't think about, oh, we put money in a mutual fund, we put money in a 401k, we put money in an IRA. We don't often think about that and how our money is being used and what it's going to. So we want to talk about that a little bit as well. And then when we donate money, it can, we're the 501c3 where we get the tax deduction for the nonprofits that we're donating to. Wonderful organizations. Some of them can do really well, and some of them we don't look at as much and realize how they're using some of our funds, and it can be in ways different than what we expect. So money that we use in a whole variety of ways has a significant impact. What we need to do, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on it later, is figuring out what our values are and how we can have our values match how we use our money. So the values, our values are the beliefs that we hold and what we really feel is important. And many times I'm guilty of it too. I just sort of say, oh, this credit card is good. It's giving me miles or points or whatever else. Or, this bank has the most convenient ATM, therefore I will use that. Or this brokerage firm has the best online transactions, or whatever other criteria you use. A lot of it's simply around convenience or benefits that we get. It may not be, we may not select financial institutions based on our values. And that's what we're trying to look at today, is how do our values affect it? So it's, how does what we save or spend or donate or invest, what's the personal impact that we have from that? And what are we indirectly funding by our financial actions? So we can match our values and our money in terms of how we spend, save, invest, and donate. And those are sort of the four that we can go beyond that, but they're sort of the four main components of what we are doing with our money. And added on to that is which financial institutions we use for each of those aspects. If we're spending, where we keep our cash, or what credit card, debit card we use, or what mobile money we use, whether it's Apple Pay or something else, or Chase or Banner Bank or whatever it is. Same thing with saving, where we put our money, how we invest, where we donate. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at values and how we can link those values to the various parts of our financial life and choose the institutions that we work with based on our values. That's sort of the fundamental principle that we're looking at for today. And as we do this, we can go back to Scripture and say, what are we charged with doing with our money? And we can take things out of a whole variety of places. But if we look at 1 Peter, use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And we often think of that as, how do we use our skills or our talents? But whatever gift we're given, our money is a gift too. And so that needs to be as faithful stewards of what God has given us. And we're doing it for God's purposes in our lives. From Luke, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And that's sort of a little different in one sense of what we're looking at today. It's not so, gaining friends. I look at, if we take that more broadly, it is doing good. And the friends can be the environment, it can be whatever is around us, God's creation, that we're using the worldly wealth to care for God's creation. First Timothy, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who provides us with everything to enjoy. And so it is, again, going back to our faith to look at what values are we going to use in choosing our financial decisions. And finally, Proverbs, going back to the Old Testament, there's a lot in the Old Testament we can look at. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. And so that is, using our money in the right way. So, it's thinking through, we're guided to look at what we do. So the first thing we need to do as we look at this is really figure out, what are your core values, those beliefs that are important in our daily lives. So what are your guiding principles? What gives your life meaning? And I'm just going to pause for half a minute or a minute. You don't need to say anything, but just, it's just a long list of values. And say, what's important? And it's like, oh, all of these are important. But as we're looking at what we're going to use in guiding our financial decisions, what are the 2, 3, 4, something like that, are most important to you? So why don't we just pause for a sec and say, what are the values that we're going to look at? That, so let's say the 3 that are most important for you. So you'll be able to see the slides later again, and perhaps spend more time on it. But each of us is going to have different things. It's sort of like, okay, we're from St. Mark, so faith may be fairly important for us. Family for many of us. Nature is on here, which is sort of interesting. We don't think of nature as a value, but as we're looking at creation here, that can be one. If you're into climate justice, justice is one part of this that you may think about. It can be compassion for people, compassion for environment or wildlife. So it's helpful to just sort of narrow it down and say, what are the fundamental principles, fundamental values that I'm going to use when I think about my money? So let's start with banking. And this is a bank that we use every day. The great report came out recently. But our savings and checking account balances affect climate change. We don't often make that connection in there. But the 11 largest banks in the U.S., this report came out recently, is the Rainforest Action Network and Sierra Club and a number of others put this together. Came out fairly recently, but it's, how are our banks using our money in the lending that they're doing? And the 11 largest banks use between an average 19.4% and up to 30% of their portfolios, which is your savings account and checking account and mine, to loan to carbon intensive industries. And the calculation that was done, which is sort of interesting to me, and you can debate this back and forth and say it's right or wrong and dig into it, is if you have $1,000 in a savings account and that money is lent out to organizations, it equals the carbon emissions for flying from New York to Seattle or Seattle to New York, which is about 1,350 pounds. And we're saying my $1,000 in the savings account is having this impact. I don't usually think about that. And so we do need to look at what lending is being done by the bank, or what is bank doing with our money, And we could consider changing to a more climate responsible bank, which can reduce emissions significantly because they're lending differently and using our money differently. So there are less carbon intensive banks that we can look at and some ways of finding that. So what I want to do is just sort of look at it, conceptually, but also practically of how do you find them. So there are a number, if you just do, Google carbon friendly bank or something like that, Amalgamated Bank, Aspiration Bank. I looked at ones in Washington State, Sound Credit Union, Beneficial. Those are ones that say they're not going to lend or underwrite or invest for fossil fuel extraction. And so that can be one way to do it. And there's the Fossil Free Alliance, which has a list of banks that are say they're not lending to fossil fuel companies. So that's one way to do it, to look for it. There are other ways as well. We can also engage with the banks that we use or that we invest in, for that matter. Banks, what is it? Most banks and most organizations in the U.S. now have a net zero commitment. So we can go back and say, is that real or is that greenwashing by what our bank is saying? Some banks will have the no fossil fuel loan pledge. We can also engage with the bank. I have some small investments and I'm getting my shareholder voting materials from the brokerage firm I use. And I hadn't used these much before and figured this year I'll go take a look at it. So it's like click on it and you can vote online in about 3 minutes. And so I'm going through and looking at, is there a climate related resolution that's being voted on this year? And if there is, I'll vote on that. So a lot of ways that you can engage your bank fairly easily, but it goes back to selecting the right bank in the first place. The credit cards and debit cards we use are in many ways the same sort of thing. When we make a purchase, a percentage of each purchase goes to the card issuer. And in the US, it's about 1.5 or 2% that MasterCard or Visa sends to the card issuer. And so they're using that. The merchant that is processing the transaction also pays a percentage to the card issuer. If you're not paying off your full balance every month, that money is going to the card issuer. And so, my background's in banking and in payments, and credit cards are a wonderful product for the bank. They make bundles and bundles of money because that percentage of transactions, each one is relatively small. And you say, okay, my 27 cents, how much is that going to add up to? But when you've got millions or hundreds of millions of transactions a day, those 27 cents add up to a lot of money. And the financial institution uses that to fund their activities, which includes the lending that they do and the selection of who they lend to. And they pay their shareholders who are going to use their money in certain ways. And so what you're doing with your card can have an impact. And returns on cards are more profitable than any other transaction. And it's interesting, I found this statistic on if we tap our card to make a payment, how many grams of carbon dioxide are we creating with the electricity that's done and the transaction flowing back and forth? It's like 5 grams for cards and 10 grams for cash. What that says is, if we reduce our transactions, we bundle them together, we're going to have less carbon emissions, something I really hadn't thought about before. So interesting how calculations are being done. There are some eco-friendly cards around that we can use. And so what these do, they're from financial institutions that are generally not lending their money to fossil fuel companies, but they're also promoting eco-friendly transactions. So some of them will have a carbon calculator that you can use. I mean, you can go online and do that, but you can do it for individual purchases. The cash back or the benefits that you get vary depending on the type of business where you spend your money. So a number of them will have a list of eco-friendly businesses. And so you'll get more cash back or more benefits by spending at those institutions. Aspiration Bank is one. I'm not recommending these. I'm just using them as examples. But you can go online and take a look and compare it with the bank you're using and to say, oh, there's these things. I should look around for this a little bit more or consider whatever from whatever bank you're using. But Aspiration Bank has a personal sustainability score that they will provide to you. You can calculate and mitigate your driving impact. So to look at, when you make fuel purchases or other purchases relating to driving, they can calculate the impact of it. If you make a transaction, you can round up. If it's $10.38, you can round up to $11 and donate that money that can be used to plant a tree. Future Card gives you 5% back on green purchases, and they've got, here are what green purchases are, and they'll reward you for reducing emissions. So it's sort of an interesting way of incentivizing transactions that are more climate friendly. And then, what we purchase also has an impact because our purchases create emissions, whatever we buy. So, food and comes from agriculture, and I've used that as an example on the right-hand side because I found this diagram and I thought, oh, this is really cool. It shows, where where emissions come related to food. And part of it is just, from land use change. If you look at the beef or the soybeans that are being produced from Brazil, for example, and rainforests being burned down, or the palm oil, that's forest being burned down. So that's the land use change that we're looking at. And then farming is the vast majority. I had not realized until recently how much methane comes out of raising rice, for example, which is a key crop. But whatever it is, there's the farming, and it's the fertilizers which produce nitrous oxide or use nitrous oxide, for example, and the farm equipment that's used. So there's a whole variety of things around the food, the emissions from farming. And then there's part of it also that goes to the processing, creating the nice shaped packages that we use, the packaging that's put into it, getting it to the supermarket we buy from, and then the 30% of food that we waste on average. And so there's a whole lot in there around food, and I thought cool diagram. But it's not just food, it's the clothing we buy, the gadgets that we buy, our laptops or our phones, or what is it, the Apple devices that come out that fit on your face, or all kinds of things. Richard and I were talking earlier about the routers and modems that we buy, all kinds of things that we buy. Transport, whether we've got gasoline-powered cars or electric vehicles or scooters or bikes or whatever we're using, or we're taking planes for our vacation, we're traveling. There's the production, the transport, packaging, retailers, waste of everything we do. What 30 or 40% of clothing is thrown away every year. Just, some statistics are amazing. So what we buy, what we throw away, the processing can make a difference. So we can choose eco-friendly products and services that we buy. It sends a message to the companies also where demand is increasing or decreasing. We can choose eco-friendly businesses locally to buy from. And there are online directories that we can use. Choose more sustainable products or ones with less packaging. When we buy from certain places, Home Depot Eco, for example, or Target has circularity. They've got some online information that we can use. And then pre-loved items, whether it's Amazon Renewed or Best Buy or others, have recycled electronics and recycled other types of goods that we can use. And then there's software that we can use to figure out what the impact is, whether it's Rewild or Impact Score or Palau. And there are links on here also that show where some of it is. So there's a lot we can do with our purchases as well. So I know a few people have to leave before too long, but let's just pause here and ask for comments, input, ideas.
I didn't get a good look at that screen.
Yeah.
Sorry, questions? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. So, what changes can you make in your banking or whatever? What can you do with your card? What purchases are you going to do? Focusing on those areas of sort of the banking, the cards, the purchases that we make to begin with. And then again, we'll look at investing and donating next. But what
So
changed,
Okay.
Carolyn? Yeah.
So Richard, if I know that if you pay off your credit card balance
Yep.
every month, you are saving the interest that the
Yep.
bank gets,
Yes.
but they've already gotten the 2 or 3%
Yep.
when you did the transaction.
That's correct.
Hmm.
It's the national sales tax.
Yeah. So for example, if you do, let's say you use a card from Aspiration Bank, and again, I'm not recommending, I'm just using it as an example. Whatever profits they have, they're not lending to fossil fuel companies. They're planting trees with some of their profits. So they're using it in a different way. And if you're using, Chase or Bank of America or one of the others, they've got a slightly different way of using their profits. Same thing with the money you have in your savings account. It's going to be used in different ways.
So I get irritated when I try to go into an ATM and withdraw money from my credit union account. And now I go specifically to certain places like BECU or directly to that credit union or one of their affiliates to withdraw money. So that's, I think, am I right, that there is no money going to the bank if I go that route?
I guess what you're looking at is the fee or charge for withdrawing. Yeah. So
there's
that
no fee.
yeah, that portion of it is not going to the bank for it. That's true. So they're getting less fees when you do that.
Okay.
But then the fundamental question is, what financial institution do you get your card from, and what are they doing with their money?
So that's the question I need to ask my credit union, I guess.
Yeah, and there's some good indicators on there. I mean, we can look later at some of the references on it, or you can look at the thing I did with the Fossil Fuel Alliance. Has lists of more friendlier banks. Jacqueline, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, before COVID, Gordon and I, my husband and I, were really trying to live a lot more with cash. And we were pretty successful. I mean, it's especially nice when you go to a restaurant, you just put money down and you don't have to wait to sign, things like that. But during COVID, it kind of changed our behavior. And now we're into just credit, using the card all the time. So that really makes me think about that. But I think where we've really done probably the most is around what we buy, because we're huge thrift store users. We buy our toilet paper from this company called Who Gives a Crap. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they give a lot of their a percentage to building toilets in undeveloped countries, and the toilet paper is made out of bamboo, which is reusable. So I give them a plug for people, and it's nice because they mail you this huge box and you don't have to go to Costco or anywhere and carry it home. So it's really, really easy. And I don't know if people know about Ridwell, that's doing a lot of work with plastics, trying to get plastics. And I just got something from them today around a new company or another company I think it's called Grove, which is they're really working hard to provide a lot more household products, shampoos, all kinds of things that you use in more sustainable ways. So just to put some of those things out there. But I haven't, I'm really interested in sort of moving into some of the financial directions that you're pointing to. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Richard?
Yeah, your second question there reminded me of something that seems to have resolved itself, but if you're going to say that tapping is the lowest carbon impact of payments, well, there are stores, and I'm thinking specifically of Fred Meyer, who were not taking taps from certain vendors. So there's this whole other layer of just sort of the usual capitalist infighting going on, where these people are just, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, they weren't taking Apple Pay for a long time, but
do
they're
now.
now. But when I say Apple Pay, I just mean they weren't going through Apple's payment
Hmm.
system. So if you have an iPhone, you had to use a card for that. Anyway, that was just something I noticed.
I did use Apple Pay with them the other day, and I was surprised because they're, yeah. So but evidently at my store they're starting to use it. So in Issaquah.
CJ?
Oh, well, the thing I've started using are laundry strips.
Hmm.
So no powder, no liquid. It's just what seems like a little piece of paper, and if it's a small load, I just tear it in half. And
Nice.
it's really easy to recycle.
Yeah. 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 Oh, that's fantastic. Lots of ideas on the purchase side. And then sort of getting back behind that again, where is the money that you use to make those purchases? And that's something, they're trying to highlight today that, we usually don't think about that. So the ideas on purchases, CJ and Jacqueline, absolutely fantastic ideas. Thank you. And then where do we keep the money that we use to make those purchases, whether it's cash, whether it's the card, whether it's the phone, whatever it is. And thinking about that a little bit of where's our money?
Yeah, so we use credit union also, and I guess I've sort of assumed that that's better than Bank of America or whatever, but it's not like we've delved into their investment
Where do they put our money? Yeah.
strategies.
Yeah, there's another side of the what bank do you use? And I hate Chase, but we do have sort of pass through stuff through them simply because we need a safety deposit box, and finding a safety deposit box is extremely difficult in this town. So it's not where we keep most of it, but we do have to have it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you're right. I mean, that can be sort of minimizing one bank and maximizing another bank based on values. Yeah.
You've really
Fantastic.
issued us a good challenge, Richard, to look at where we are putting this money and finding out what we can from those institutions. So thank you for that.
Sure. And there are a number of reports, and most of the banks in their annual report, it takes some digging to find some of this stuff, but there are sustainability reports which can be a pain to read through. So I know a couple people need to leave for the other activity this evening at St. Mark's. Have a good rest of the evening. The recording will be there, and we're going to move on and look at the investing and donating side. No apologies needed. There's lots of things going on. So do take a look at the recording, and we'll take a look at what you do with the investments you have and how you donate money and how you set up your estate looking forward as well. So let's go ahead and move on to that.
I'm just going to say I'm so relieved that this conversation will be back out on the St. Mark's website so I can finish it.
Good. Okay. Yeah. It's sort of 10:04. There we go.
Okay, there we go.
No, it was 7:04. Sorry.
Yeah. Get in our time zone.
Okay. So we're going to move on and look at investments. And we'll look at that from a number of different ways, and probably spend a little bit more time on that because it's fairly interesting to look at it from several perspectives. So, the money that you place, and any extra money that you have is not just in your ordinary savings or checking account. Hopefully each of us is saving a little bit extra and probably investing it, whether we're putting it in mutual funds or stocks or bonds or 401ks or other investments. We're buying buildings, we're buying any number of things as investments. When we're investing through an organization or investing into an organization, the actions of those companies can help or hurt the environment and climate and people. So I'm getting a lot of recommendations at this point to invest in oil companies because the returns are forecast to be relatively good. And the question is, do I really want to invest in oil companies that could have a negative impact on the climate? Same thing with mining companies. And some of these, yes, we need a transition. So, but what are they doing long term in terms of where they put their money? Mining companies, same kind of thing. You can take care of the earth. You can be less friendly to the earth. When we're investing in food companies, JBS is a big company, and there are a number of agricultural companies, food companies around that we can invest in. What are they doing? And how are they sourcing their products in there? For example, Unilever has done relatively well at putting together their sourcing and their sustainability processes. Not perfect, but doing relatively well, and some other companies are not doing as well. So what do we invest in? So the actions can help or hurt the environment. And the other part of it that we don't often think about is there's the physical risk and transition risk that companies face. The physical risk is whether Coors or Heineken at one point was talking about how they make beer. And they said, we need to be very careful about making sure we have water because if there's a drought or if the water is polluted, we can't make beer. Which for them, it's an example on it. There can be, floods that bring down a factory or shut things down. There are a lot of automobiles that were made in Thailand, and automobile parts. And when Thailand flooded a couple of years ago, there was a shortage of parts. So there are physical risks. There's also a transition risk in the sense that, if a bank is making a 30-year loan to an oil company, or a 30-year loan to build a dam somewhere, or another long-term loan, what's going to be the impact 10, 20, 30 years from now of climate change? And could they, the dam dries up or oil is no longer used, and you got this power plant that's a stranded asset or other things. So your choice or not choosing has consequences. And this can be with mutual funds too, because if we just say, what's the best return or what's the recommended mutual fund, same thing, that money is invested somewhere in various types of companies, and not looking and choosing has consequences. So what can we do on a practical basis? Well, first of all, it's going back to that chart of values and our 3 key values, or 5, or however many you want to use, and figuring out, can I use those values to govern my investments? So if my key value is making money, then you're going to invest one way. If one of your key values is nature, you may invest another way. Or if it's faith, you may invest another way. So those values lead to some of the ethical guidelines that we can use to align our investment decisions and our strategies with the common good and with creation care. So some people will create an investment policy statement personally to say, what do I invest in? And it can be formal that you write it down. It can be informal that you look at it a variety of different ways. And you say, okay, we're going to invest in or not invest in companies that make guns or companies that destroy nature, or whatever the personal value is. You can say, that's part of my investment policy, my investment philosophy. And then we can use that in the investments that we make, whether it's the 401ks, or other mutual funds we buy, or the individual stocks we buy. And we can talk, if we use a financial advisor, we can inform the advisor of our preferences and say we want to do that. I manage a trust, and I had a conversation last week before last, with the investment advisors to say, okay, let's transition it over to climate-friendly companies or mutual funds. And so they're transitioning part of the portfolio. It takes a while, but transitioning it over. So it's climate-friendly investments. We can also vote our shares, as I mentioned earlier, and engage companies, engage boards, ask questions along the way. So there are a variety of things that we can do. We can also do impact investing. And so a lot of times we look primarily at the financial return of the investments that we're doing. But investments can also be done for impact. And that impact can be environmental, it can be social, it can be spiritual. And the investment can have, financial or environmental or social returns along with financial returns. And so just, a couple of personal examples on that. I invest through an organization called Iroquois Valley that is both funding farmers, and they're looking at regenerative farming, and they're looking at keeping farming in farming families, so they make loans to farmers to keep farms in families. So it has some social impact, it has some environmental impact, and my overall return is less, which I've chosen to do in order to have that return. I invest in some startups. And the nice thing is that with Start Engine and WeFunder and things like that, if you want to invest in startups, you can do it with $100. You can also do it with $100,000, $1 million. It all depends on how much you have, but basically $100. And so some of the startups are working on solving climate-related problems. Richard Wesley and I are in one group that looks at this and invest in some startups. And they are shifting over to renewable energy. They are reducing waste. One company I'm looking at this point is using coffee grounds to produce chocolate. So they're reusing coffee grounds, which would ordinarily just become waste and result in emissions. There are things around fashion, you name it. There are sectors that you can invest in startups. You can also look at the investment funds, and there are investment funds that are focused on climate, or investment funds that are focused on social good, or a number of other areas. So the financial returns can be higher or they can be lower. The impact can be higher or the impact can be lower. Some of the studies that have been done recently have shown that if you make investments in companies that have relatively strong ESG, environmental and social and governance principles, returns can be higher than for other companies. So how are we going to do this? Because it sounds really good, but how are we going to do it on a practical basis? Some people simply use positive or negative screening. And they say, I won't invest in oil companies. I won't invest in gun companies. I won't invest in mining companies. Or I will invest in companies that are buying agricultural land for regenerative agriculture. Or I will invest in companies that are producing solar power. And so you can use that positive or negative screening. One of the things you can do, there are some services you can use. Yahoo Finance and Morningstar have things that are free that you can use to get some indications on companies. Some of it you can pay for as well. I just looked at the free ones. Morningstar has some things you can pay for. Yahoo Finance generally seems to be free. But that's another way to look at it. There are some mutual funds that are relatively ESG friendly. Praxis and Calvert and Eventide either have funds that they offer to people or they have guidance in there on terms of what you can do. So those are some sources to look at. If you're using a financial advisor, there's greenamerica.org. has some financial advisors that will look at climate-friendly investments for you. Kingdom Advisors looks at has financial advisors that have more spiritual basis for their practice, and so they can help you invest in organizations that are more faith-friendly. And for us, it's Christian. They could probably do other faiths as well, but Kingdom Advisors can do that. So those are just some examples of the sources you can use to look for it and do things that are relatively ESG friendly. The donations that we make also have an impact. And, we get requests for donations all the time. I just chose Salvation Army because, every Christmas they're out there with their tin cans and it's wonderful. And, money's going to Salvation Army, which I think is a good organization. But I would get requests. There's Giving Tuesday, I think is in December, and I was getting, 10 requests a day. Now I'm only getting a couple requests a day for money, but it's just, there are organizations out there all the time. And, many of them are good organizations. As we look at it though, of what organizations to donate to, we can choose the cause that we want to support that reflects our values and focus on those organizations. It can be social values, it can be climate values, it can be spiritual values, it can be other values. And different people have different organizations. A lot of what I do is around climate and conservation. And the church as well. Some people will give to organizations that support the disabled or support the elderly. Or support particular disadvantaged groups, or children's education. I mean, any number of groups, but it's aligning with values, aligning the donations we do with values and choosing it, and then looking at what the organization actually does with our money and making purposeful donations. A lot of times, someone says, can you donate to this cause? I support it. And I say, thank you. I really am glad you're supporting it. I donate to these organizations, and I decline that. I do occasionally support something that I agree with the cause and it helps someone else, but there are also the random donations. We walk down the street and someone's raising money, or we walk through the airport and someone's raising money. It's looking at it being purposeful in choosing what we do. So part of that is analyzing where organizations got donations. And some organizations are just getting a lot of donations from fossil fuel companies or others that may not be quite as climate friendly, for example. We can read the organization's materials, and we can also say, what are they doing with their money, and look at the outcome of it, not just the output. A lot of times, if you read through the annual reports from charities, it's like we had 27,000 people show up for our events this year. And we worked with, we had 53 partners that we worked with. Well, are they actually planting trees or teaching kids to read or whatever it is? And what percentage of your donation is going to administration and what's going to the program? So if half of it's going for fundraising and administration, there's relatively little going into the program. For example. So we can find out those kind of things. And again, making sure the organization aligns with your values. Sometimes we can donate to small, underfunded, or less known organizations. So I made one donation last year that was a catalyst for a program that helped protect birds. And they were starting up a new program. My donation was small enough, it didn't change the world, but it was helping them start something up that was relatively small and needed some support as a catalyst in there. And so being a catalyst for those things can be important for us. We can also look at estate planning with our wills and stewarding money beyond our being around. And some of us who are not in our 20s anymore, probably spending a little more time on this, whether we have a little money or a lot of money. But as we look at estates and whatever you want to do with your money, And it's up to you what you do with it. What impact do you want to have? Is it all going to family? And how will they use it? And saying, okay, my children are responsible, or my children love big red Ferraris with powerful engines, and they want 10 of them in the garage. And you're just looking at that kind of thing and how money is structured. Some of it can go to causes that we want to support. And so if, when I'm gone, get hit by the bus tomorrow, is some of it going to a conservation organization or a music organization or something else? What do we want to support? What problems do we want to solve? So some of our money can go to solving particular problems in a variety of ways. I've got sort of a small fund set up that my children hopefully will manage and do the right thing with. We'll see. But part of that is just getting them to think about, I'm passing some money on to them to donate in a variety of ways. What are they going to do with the donations that they make? And how will you be remembered? So the will that you put together, what you do with whatever money you have left over, can reflect your values as well. Using that as a catalyst, how do you want to align your investments with your values? What do you do now? How do you select charities that you donate to? And what do you want to do to improve your investing or your philanthropy, or even the estate planning that you're putting together at this point?
Well, we've been thinking a lot about this lately because I retired in the last year, and we also got an inheritance. So those together required some thinking about how we're going to invest in. And so from the beginning, we wanted to do investing that was climate friendly or carbon conscious, or whatever phrase we use. So we've kind of gone through this process, and I guess we made some initial decisions. So I did want to throw out this site called As You Sow.
Oh yeah.
SOW, which
Fantastic.
rates different, especially mutual funds. When we were talking to different financial advisors, we could sort of look at, okay, what were they recommending and how does that work on here? And
it's hard.
It has different screens, so you can do fossil free, or you can do gender equity, you can do, kind of the different categories of ESG investing. So we've made some initial decisions where some portion is going to be in stocks, and that'll be a fossil fuel free screen, whereas the other portion will be in ETFs and mutual funds that are more a combination of screens and factors. So that's good. But we did find that it is tougher than you think. Obviously, and nothing's perfect. So, there are a lot of screens I'd like to use, but if I really enforced them all, there wouldn't be much left. But it has also made me wonder about, and I don't know if this is the right context or group, but I think that it's the kind of thing that it could be helpful to have sort of mutual education. So different people are navigating these kinds of issues, and to share a little bit what people have discovered, maybe even getting, ideally it would be great if I'd love to be part of a group that decided that at least with some portion of their investments, they wanted to have to work together on strategies, or even I think it's just to keep asking the questions of the financial advisors so that they know there is a constituency out there that wants to do to support improving our status with relation to the climate.
Hmm.
So I don't know I don't know if this, if
thank-
there's.
thanks
so
for the-
Nancy,
Great
doing
idea.
that.
I'll see what we can, I'll talk to Marjorie and see what we can do with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to build a little bit of a pool of knowledge and understanding where people could, change over time and shift things over time.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. CJ, I saw a comment about AI, and it's sort of like positive and negative, that the energy that's being used for AI, wow, that has a big impact. On the other hand, there's some screening that can be done and some ways of looking for things that AI could make it easier to find companies that are more climate friendly, creation care friendly.
Okay, I'm in this industry. And there is an insane amount of hype around this. And CJ is quite right that the resource consumption that it's going to drive, if everybody's fever dreams come true, will be insane. And this sort of touches into something I was thinking about with things we buy, and that there's some things we buy that are disposable or consumables, I think is a better word. But we just put in some solar panels and battery, and you can say, well, if you look at the cost of that system, how cheap electricity is in Seattle, is that ever going to pay for itself, even with tax credits? But I'm also hearing on some of my podcasts that, the growth in electricity demand over the next 30 years is going to be quite substantial. And some of the numbers I've heard are terrifying, like a factor of 12. We haven't put any real new capacity on the grid in 30 years, and all of a sudden we're going to do this. So it's not clear to me that that is a bad investment for me or my neighbors. But I also have heard a lot of stuff from inside the industry about, say, Google is thinking, oh, we're going to use large language models to do searching. Except that you're going to have to start running data centers off of nuclear plants to do that. And the cost there is not something, everybody just types in search, and you're not going to be able to provide this pseudo free driven by advertising service anymore. It'll just cost too much. So I'm not sure I buy a lot of this hype about what AI is going to AI. And it's actually a technical term there, and most of the things called AI are not AI. But I can see that there's a lot of hype going on here that was going to run smack dab into the practicalities of what resources are available, both in terms of water, as CJ put it, or electricity, or even just people's ability to pay, because you're not going to be able to have free search. It's going to have to cost something. And that immediately cuts out 90% of the market. So now maybe you don't need as much. So anyway, sorry. That was kind of a long rant.
Really good input. Yeah. We're getting up to the end of
A
time.
very good rant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm gonna close this out for the session. I'm gonna stay around and we can talk for however long you'd like. But let me just close this out so we conclude on the hour. And just very briefly at the end. I try to find a quote that's sort of interesting. But I like the one on the right. Make your portfolio reflect your best vision for our future. Always be thinking ahead, be optimistic. Think about the world that you want to create, because your dollars and mine, our capital, is helping shape the world. And that's sort of the message for today, that it really is shaping the world. So let's go ahead and close with a prayer. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the beauty of the earth and all creation. Help us to hear always the calling to be a good steward of your gifts, the caretakers of all you have entrusted to us on earth. Let us always recognize, cherish, and enjoy the goodness in all of creation. Teach us reverence for every person and all living things. O God, help us to use your gifts widely and share them generously. Amen. And I will stop recording.